Matthew Cartwright was a successful lawyer with a reputation for being both ruthless and brilliant in the courtroom. He had built a name for himself as one of the most formidable defense attorneys in the state, representing high-profile clients and securing acquittals in seemingly hopeless cases. Known for his charm, intelligence, and striking good looks, Matthew was the man everyone wanted to be, and the lawyer everyone wanted to hire. However, behind a polished facade, Matthew led a life filled with dangerous secrets and reckless indulgences. Despite being married with 2 children, he was notorious for his extramarital affairs. His colleagues whispered about his conquests, but his latest liaison was not just another notch on his belt. It was the one that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Sophia Moretti was a stunning, enigmatic woman in her late 20s. A recent graduate from a prestigious law school, she was the only daughter of Judge Anthony Moretti, a powerful and respected figure in the legal community. Judge Moretti was known for his unwavering commitment to justice, and he held significant sway over the state's judicial system. His daughter, Sophia, was expected to follow in his footsteps, becoming a lawyer of integrity and distinction. But Sophia had other plans. Rebellious and adventurous, she was drawn to the thrill of the forbidden. When she met Matthew at a legal fundraiser, sparks flew immediately. What began as innocent flirtation quickly escalated into a full-blown affair. They met in secret, their passion burning fiercely against the backdrop of the conservative legal world they inhabited. Matthew and Sophia's affair was a dangerous game. Not only was it a betrayal of Matthew's family, but it was also a potential scandal that could destroy Sophia's budding career and irreparably damage her father's reputation. They were careful at first, meeting in out-of-town hotels and using disposable phones. But as their relationship intensified, so did their recklessness. They began taking greater risks, and it was only a matter of time before someone noticed that someone was Janet, Matthew's wife, a sharp, perceptive woman who had been married to Matthew for over a decade. She had grown suspicious of his frequent absences and secretive behavior. Matthew had always been a difficult man to live with, controlling, demanding, and often cold, but Janet had tolerated it for the sake of their children and the life they had built together. When she discovered a series of incriminating text messages on Matthew's phone, all sent from a number she didn't recognize, Janet's suspicions were confirmed. She hired a private investigator to follow her husband, and within a week, she had all the proof she needed. Photos of Matthew and Sophia leaving a hotel together, their hands entwined, faces lit up with passion. Furious and humiliated, Janet confronted Matthew, threatening to expose him and ruin his career. Matthew, ever the smooth talker, managed to calm her down, promising to end the affair immediately. But the damage was done. Janet was not the type to forgive and forget, and she made it clear that if he didn't keep his promise, she would make him pay dearly. Despite his pledge to Janet, Matthew found it impossible to stay away from Sophia. Their connection was magnetic, addictive, and they continued to see each other in secret, even more recklessly than before. What they didn't know was that they were being watched. Judge Moretti had also grown suspicious of his daughter's behavior. Sophia had become distant, erratic, and secretive, a stark contrast to the poised, ambitious young woman he knew. Concerned, he had a private investigator look into her activities. When the investigator reported back, Judge Moretti was devastated and furious. His daughter, his pride and joy, was entangled in a sordid affair with a married man, a man who was well known and despised in their circles. Determined to end the relationship, Judge Moretti confronted Sophia, demanding that she cut all ties with Matthew. But Sophia, blinded by her love for Matthew and her desire to rebel against her father's control, refused. Their argument was explosive, and in the heat of the moment, Sophia stormed out of her father's house, vowing never to see him again. Little did she know, this defiance would set off a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. The weeks following Sophia's fallout with her father were a whirlwind of secrecy and passion. Matthew and Sophia became more reckless, meeting in public places and taking bigger risks. The thrill of the forbidden relationship blinded them to the danger they were in, but the tension was mounting, and a storm was brewing, one that would soon consume them both. One late evening, Matthew received an anonymous letter delivered to his office. The note, crudely handwritten, read, "End it with Sophia, or your whole life goes up in flames." It was a clear threat, but from whom? Janet? Judge Moretti? Someone else who knew about the affair? Matthew Matthew brushed it off, convinced it was just an empty threat. He was a master manipulator in court. This was just another game for him to win. But the threats didn't stop. Over the next few days, Matthew received several more messages, each more menacing than the last. One night, he found his car vandalized, the words "homewrecker" and "leave her alone" spray painted across the hood. Yet, despite the growing danger, he refused to let go of Sophia. Their passion was a drug he couldn't quit. On the night of August 12th, Matthew and Sophia arranged to meet at their usual secret hideout, a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town. It was their sanctuary, away from prying eyes and judgment. As Matthew drove to the cabin, he noticed a car tailing him, its headlights flashing aggressively. He tried to shake it off, taking sharp turns and speeding through deserted roads, but the car kept following him. Panicking, Matthew called Sophia. "I think someone's following me," he said, his voice trembling with a fear he hadn't felt in years. Sophia, waiting at the cabin, tried to calm him down. "Just get here safely, okay? We'll figure this out." Minutes later, Matthew pulled up to the cabin, his car skidding to a halt. He jumped out, looking over his shoulder, but the mysterious car had disappeared. Shaken, he rushed inside, where Sophia greeted him with a worried expression. "We need to stop this," he said, catching his breath. "Someone is trying to scare us, and I think they mean it." But Sophia, in her reckless defiance, dismissed his concerns. "No one can scare us, Matthew. We've come too far to turn back now." As they argued, the tension between them crackled like a live wire. They were so absorbed in their heated exchange that they didn't hear the soft crunch of footsteps approaching the cabin. It wasn't until the front door burst open that they realized they were no longer alone. A masked figure stood in the doorway, a gun in hand. Matthew and Sophia froze, their argument forgotten in the face of this new terror. The intruder raised the gun, aiming it at Matthew. "End this, or I will," the figure growled, voice distorted by a modulator. "Who are you?" Matthew shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want?" "I want you to stay away from her," the masked intruder said, their gaze shifting momentarily to Sophia. "You're destroying everything." In a desperate bid to protect Sophia, Matthew stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Okay, just calm down. We'll stop. I promise." But the intruder wasn't convinced. "Liar," they spat, and before either Matthew or Sophia could react, the gun went off. The sound was deafening in the small cabin, and Matthew crumpled to the floor, clutching his side where the bullet had torn through him. Sophia screamed, rushing to Matthew's side as blood pooled beneath him. The intruder stood over them, gun still aimed, but they didn't fire again. Instead, they turned and fled, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had appeared. Shaking and sobbing, Sophia grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "Help! My boyfriend's been shot," she cried, her voice thick with panic. "Please, send help." The police arrived within minutes, but it felt like an eternity to Sophia. Matthew was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and the cabin was sealed off as a crime scene. Detectives combed through the area, searching for clues about the assailant, but they found nothing. No fingerprints, no shell casings, no traces of the mysterious intruder. The only evidence was a small, crumpled piece of paper near the door, with a message scrawled on it. "This isn't over." Sophia was taken in for questioning, but she could offer little information. She described the masked figure, the threat, the gunshot, but it all seemed like a blur. The police were skeptical, pressing her for details, but she insisted she knew nothing more. Meanwhile, Matthew was fighting for his life in the ICU. The bullet had damaged several organs, and he was in and out of consciousness. But when he woke up, he had only one question on his mind. Is Sophia safe? Matthew survived the initial surgery, but remained in critical condition for several days. The police, desperate for a breakthrough, interviewed him as soon as he was conscious enough to speak. Weak and disoriented, he could only give a vague description of the masked intruder. "They wanted us to end it," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. They said we were destroying everything." With few leads, the detectives turned their attention to Sophia and her father, Judge Moretti. The judge, though distraught over his daughter's involvement in the scandal, denied any knowledge of the attack. He was adamant that while he disapproved of Sophia's relationship with Matthew, he would never resort to violence. His alibi was solid. He had been presiding over a high-profile case at the time of the shooting. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered a series of text messages between Sophia and the investigator. The messages revealed that she had hired him to keep an eye on Matthew, claiming she was worried about his safety. However, the tone of the messages suggested something more sinister. In one exchange, Sophia had written, "I need this to end, whatever it takes." With this new evidence, the police began to suspect that Sophia might have orchestrated the attack herself. Perhaps the masked intruder was a hired gun, someone she had enlisted to scare Matthew into ending their affair. But something went wrong, and the plan escalated into violence. Sophia, realizing she was now a suspect, hired a high-powered attorney and refused to answer any more questions without legal counsel. Then, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a break came in the form of a tip from an anonymous source. The caller, a man with a gruff voice, claimed to know the identity of the masked intruder. He directed the detectives to a rundown apartment in a seedy part of town, saying they would find everything they needed there. When the police arrived, they found the apartment abandoned, but inside, they discovered a stash of weapons, including a gun that matched the caliber of the bullet that had struck Matthew. More importantly, they found a notebook filled with detailed notes about Matthew and Sophia's movements over the past few months, as well as several newspaper clippings about Judge Moretti's high-profile cases. The most damning evidence, however, was a series of photographs hidden in a drawer. The photos showed Sophia meeting with a man outside the same cabin where the shooting had occurred just a few days before the attack. The man's face was partially obscured, but the investigators recognized him as the private investigator Sophia had hired. Faced with this evidence, the police arrested the investigator and brought him in for questioning. Under intense pressure, he eventually cracked. He confessed that Sophia had hired him to scare Matthew into breaking off the relationship, but when Matthew refused to back down, things escalated. He admitted to wearing the mask and firing the shot, but he claimed he never intended to kill Matthew, only to wound him. Sophia, realizing her plan had gone horribly wrong, had panicked and distanced herself from the investigator, hoping to avoid suspicion. But it was too late. The confession, combined with the evidence found in the apartment, was enough to charge her with conspiracy to commit murder. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the legal community. The daughter of a respected judge, involved in such a heinous crime, was a scandal that no one could have predicted. Sophia was arrested and taken into custody, her once promising career in ruins as the trial unfolded. The prosecution laid out their case. Sophia, desperate to keep her relationship with Matthew intact and terrified of losing him, had concocted the plan to intimidate him, but her reckless actions had spiraled out of control, nearly costing Matthew his life. The defense tried to paint Sophia as a victim of her own emotions, manipulated by the investigator, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Sophia was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The private investigator received a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony against her. Matthew, having barely survived the ordeal, made a full recovery, but chose to leave his law firm and move out of state, his once bright career overshadowed by the scandal. Judge Moretti, devastated by his daughter's actions, retired from the bench and retreated from public life. The case became a cautionary tale of obsession and betrayal, a reminder that even those who seem to have everything can be undone by their darkest desires.